Is the modern presidency being modeled on Voldemort's takeover of the wizarding world? The parallels are too precise to ignore. Voldemort's ascent was not a single coup but a sequence. Denial, decrees, spectacle, silencing, purges, widening nets, and finally the naming of an enemy commander. Step by step, suspicion became reality. The same pattern, nearly point for point, has replayed in Washington. What began as denial of limits and dismissal of oversight has hardened into policy, prosecution, and purge. At the Department of Justice in 2025, independence was redefined as disloyalty, judgment as betrayal, and resistance as conspiracy, until the phantom enemy invoked from the podium appeared to stand, named and real. It began with denial. In the wizarding world, when Voldemort returned, the ministry under Cornelius Fudge refused to admit it. They paired denial with smear. The Daily Prophet painted warnings as hysteria, and Harry was dragged before the full Wizengamot in a show trial, designed not to seek truth but to discredit him. The aim was control of narrative. At Justice, February brought its counterpart. The president ordered the dismissal of every remaining Biden-era United States attorney. Attrition cascaded through divisions, 2/3 gone from the federal programs branch, 70% lost in civil rights. The story written from the top was clear. Independence was partisanship, judgment was betrayal. Like the ministry, power tried to define reality before evidence could. So from there, legalistic capture followed. In Hogwarts, Dolores Umbridge arrived with all those educational decrees, loads of inspections, and of course, the inquisitorial squad. Authority was dressed up in paperwork, plaques, and endless procedure. The method was suffocation by rule. At Justice, leadership built its own kind of architecture of control, a so-called weaponization working group, to reframe both past and present cases through loyalty tests. Corporate enforcement and FCPA policies that centralized discretion right at main justice, and senior attorneys exiled to the hollow sanctuary city's enforcement unit. All of this wore the mask of guidance and best practice, but the substance was the same as Umbridge's decrees, procedure as a disguise for enforcing loyalty. When rules alone just couldn't intimidate, spectacle did the job. The ministry staged justice to frighten Harry's disciplinary hearing, Trelawney's expulsion right there in the courtyard, those midnight raids on Hagrid, and the stunning of McGonagall. The aim was humiliation in full public view, turning prestige into a cautionary tale. The DOJ just followed the same script. In August, they brought a Hatch Act probe against Special Counsel Jack Smith, publicly opened it, and then just left it ongoing. The FBI raided John Bolton's home and office, seizing documents but filing no charges. Affidavits were unsealed, dramatic, sure, but pretty inconclusive in the end. Every move here was more about theater than substance, turning the whole process into a kind of punishment. Just like those ministry raids, the real lesson wasn't about who was guilty, but rather about who could be touched. To keep control, the chorus itself had to be silenced. Voldemort's ministry captured the Daily Prophet, banned the Quibbler, and outlawed student groups. Later on, they invented the Muggle-born Commission, just to criminalize identity. The goal was always the same: leave only the official voice. In September, the echoes rang in Washington. After the assassination of Charlie Kirk, the Attorney General floated so-called hate speech prosecutions. The president declared Antifa a domestic terrorist organization. A presidential memorandum named left-leaning nonprofits and donors as agitators, warning of investigations to come. Jimmy Kimmel's show was suspended and networks were pressured not to carry his monologues. Speech itself had become suspect. As in the ministry, the method was to throttle channels of dissent until silence felt safer than truth. But institutions can be hollowed without being torn down. Voldemort left the ministry's marble intact but gutted its guardrails. Competent auras were reassigned, professors neutralized, the Wizengamot cowed. A puppet minister under Imperius kept the facade alive while Death Eaters dictated policy. The Department of Justice mirrored this hollowing. The Federal Programs Branch and Civil Rights Division were bled of talent. US attorneys and senior prosecutors resigned rather than front political cases. Inspectors general were purged in January. By September, a federal court ruled the purge unlawful but left oversight unrepaired. The institution's shell remained, lecterns, seals, press conferences, but its substance had been thinned. Attrition was method, control was motive. From such conditions, resistance is forced underground. At Hogwarts, the bans and decrees generated the very secret society the Ministry feared. Dumbledore's army meeting in the Room of Requirement, keeping alive the practices outlawed above ground. The Ministry called it conspiracy. Repression made it real. So too in Washington. At first, resistance was open resignations, whistleblower disclosures, rulings that demanded evidence. When those were branded as treachery, resistance migrated to encrypted threads, Senate drop boxes, law school seminars, pro bono panels. Exiles spoke carefully, but spoke. Sidelined lawyers sharpened their footnotes into instruments. To power, these acts looked like the conspiracy it had imagined. In truth, they were the inevitable product of criminalizing independence. The net widened next. Voldemort's ministry imposed dragnet laws. The Muggle-born Registration Commission, roaming snatchers, arrests like Stan Shunpikes to prove vigilance. Rare charges became tools to sustain fear. At justice, selective prosecutions followed the same arc. Mortgage misstatement cases, which were vanishingly rare, suddenly targeted Letitia James, Lisa Cook, and Adam Schiff. Investigations were dangled over Brennan and Bolton. A United States attorney who refused pressure was ousted. Rarity was the feature, not the flaw. Each unusual case validated the narrative. If charges were brought, the enemy must be real. Selectivity became policy. Policy became proof. Finally came the naming of the commander. At Hogwarts, the Ministry's decrees and raids culminated in the move against Dumbledore himself, accused as architect of rebellion. With that accusation, the Phantom Army became official fact, and the war could be waged openly. In Washington, September 25th brought the parallel. James Comey was indicted. Within hours, the president promised, there will be others. Oversight had been declared unlawfully purged, but it remained crippled. Speech was chilled. Rivals were in the crosshairs. The imagined army that began as a whisper was now treated as the governing premise. Paranoia became prophecy. And here lies the crux. By persecuting principled, open acts of resistance, resignations, disclosures, rulings, the presidency transformed opposition into something darker, underground, improvisational, less accountable. Instead of honest refusal, resistance shifted to shadows. Instead of careful record-making, whispers and coded speech. Instead of oversight reports, contraband truths. Each lever of control, prosecution, speech policing, media silencing, institutional hollowing, made opposition more like the spectre feared. Voldemort imagined Dumbledore's army into existence by trying to suppress it. Trump did the same with Comey's. The legend shows how paranoia, once acted upon, conjures its own enemy, and how the attempt to destroy an army is the act that makes it real.